You did everything you were told to do. You worked hard, stayed consistent, avoided unnecessary risks, and believed that if you followed the path long enough, money would eventually take care of you. But now, looking back, something doesn't quite add up, and you can't ignore it anymore, because after all those years, the question isn't whether you survived, it's whether you actually won. And for many men over 60, the answer is uncomfortable. Not failure, not collapse, but not the freedom you quietly expected either. Just enough, but never truly enough. There's a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with your effort. It has everything to do with what you were taught to believe about money before you even earned your first dollar. Ideas that sounded responsible, practical, even honorable, but carried hidden limits. You were told to work for money, not to understand it, to save it, not to multiply it, to protect it, not to direct it. And over time, those ideas became habits, and those habits became your financial identity, shaping every decision you made. But here's the part most men never stop to question. What if those rules were never designed to make you wealthy in the first place? What if they were designed to keep you stable, predictable, and dependent on a system that rewards obedience more than awareness? Because the truth is, money follows patterns. It moves in cycles, responds to decisions, and flows toward those who understand its nature, not just those who work the hardest. And if no one ever showed you how it really works, how could you have known? Think about how many years you traded your time for income, believing that consistency alone would build something substantial. And while it did create stability, it rarely created leverage. It rarely created the kind of growth that changes everything. That's the difference no one explained. Stability keeps you safe, but leverage moves you forward. And without leverage, even decades of effort can feel like running in place, progressing slowly, carefully, but never breaking through to something greater. There's a quiet realization that begins to form when you see this clearly. It's not regret, it's awareness. A sense that the game you were playing had rules you were never fully taught, and because of that, you were always operating at a disadvantage. And yet, here's what changes everything. It's not too late to understand the rules, not too late to see money differently. Because once your perspective shifts, your decisions begin to shift. And when your decisions change, your outcomes cannot remain the same. You don't need decades to apply a new understanding. You need clarity. You need direction. And you need the willingness to let go of beliefs that no longer serve you, even if they've been part of your identity for most of your life. There are men who reach this point and choose to stay where they are, telling themselves it's too late, that things are already set. But there are others who see it as a turning point, a moment where everything begins to realign, because wealth is not just about accumulation, it's about awareness. It's about recognizing where you've been operating unconsciously and choosing deliberately to think differently, to act differently, to step into a new level of control. And control is what changes everything. When you understand how money behaves, you stop reacting to it. You stop fearing it. You stop chasing it. Instead, you begin to position yourself in a way where money responds to your decisions. That shift is subtle at first, almost invisible. But over time, it builds. Your confidence grows. Your clarity sharpens. and you begin to notice opportunities you once overlooked, paths that were always there, just outside your awareness. So the question is not whether you were taught incorrectly. The question is what you choose to do now that you can see it. Because this moment, right here, is not about the past. It's about what becomes possible moving forward. What you're about to hear may challenge long-held beliefs. It may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But if you stay with it, you may begin to understand something powerful, that your financial story is not finished, and it never was. And if that's true, then this is not a reflection on what you missed. It's an invitation to finally see what was hidden, to think in a way you were never shown, and to take control of something that once felt completely out of reach. There is a realization that comes quietly, often later than expected, and it does not arrive with force, but with clarity. A man looks back upon the years he has lived, the effort he has given, the discipline he has maintained, the responsibilities he has carried, and he begins to see something that was not visible before. Not failure, not loss, but a pattern that was never questioned. If I were to begin again, I would not look first at what I did, but at what I believed while I was doing it. For belief directs effort, and effort, when guided incorrectly, may produce stability, but not advancement. And many men have lived within this condition without ever naming it. There is a common instruction given early in life, and it is accepted without resistance. A man is told to work hard, to remain consistent, to avoid unnecessary risk, and to be careful with what he earns. These instructions appear sound, they appear responsible, and so they are followed. Yet what is followed repeatedly becomes fixed. If I were beginning again, I would question these early instructions, not to reject them entirely, but to understand what they produce when applied without awareness. For working hard produces income, but it does not necessarily produce control. Consistency creates stability, but it does not ensure growth. And caution preserves what is, but it does not expand what could be. There is also the distinction between earning money and understanding it. A man may earn for many years, yet never ask what money is meant to do beyond being received and spent. He may learn how to gain it, but not how to direct it. And in this absence of understanding, his effort remains limited to the exchange of time. If I were beginning again, I would not measure my progress by what I earn alone. I would measure it by what I retain, what I direct, and what I allow to grow beyond my direct effort. For income alone does not create independence, it creates continuity. There are many men who have worked faithfully for decades. They have met their obligations. They have remained consistent. They have avoided error. Yet when they look back, they see that their position has changed, less than expected. Not because they lacked discipline, but because their effort followed a pattern that was never expanded. If I were beginning again, I would recognize this pattern early. I would see that effort, when confined to a single form, produces a single result. And if that result is stability, then stability is what will continue unless something is changed. There is also the hidden belief that time alone will complete the work. A man believes that if he continues long enough, something greater will emerge. That consistency itself will produce abundance. Yet time does not multiply effort unless it is directed toward multiplication. If I were beginning again, I would not rely upon time alone. I would direct it. For time, when combined with understanding, becomes powerful. But time without direction repeats what has already been established. There is also the influence of environment. A man observes others who follow the same path. He sees that they work, that they earn, that they maintain. And because this pattern is common, it is accepted as sufficient. It is not questioned, for it appears normal. If I were beginning again, I would not confuse what is common with what is effective. For what is common is often repeated, not examined. And what is repeated without examination may remain unchanged for generations. There is also the perception that responsibility and growth are the same. A man believes that by being responsible, he is advancing. Yet responsibility maintains, it does not necessarily expand. It preserves what has been built, but it does not guarantee that more will be built. If I were beginning again, I would separate these two ideas. I would remain responsible, but I would also seek expansion. For without expansion, responsibility becomes containment. There is also the example of men who moved beyond this limitation. A man such as Henry Ford did not remain within the boundaries of effort alone. He observed the system of work itself. He asked how effort could be multiplied, not merely applied. And in doing so, he moved from labor to leverage. If I were beginning again, I would study such men not for their position, but for their thinking, for their results were not accidental. They were the product of understanding what others were never taught to consider. There is also a visible difference between the man who follows instruction and the man who questions it. The first appears steady, reliable, consistent. The second appears directed, aware, and increasingly independent. Both may work, both may act, but their results diverge over time. If I were beginning again, I would not abandon effort. I would refine it. I would direct it toward understanding so that each action produces more than it did before. There is also the gradual nature of awareness. A man does not suddenly see everything differently. He begins to notice small distinctions. He sees where effort was applied without growth. He recognizes where opportunity was not seen. And in this recognition, something shifts. If I were beginning again, I would follow this awareness. I would not dismiss it, for it is the beginning of change. There is also the realization that no one deliberately withheld this understanding. It was simply not taught. It was not emphasized. It was not part of the common instruction. And because it was absent, many lived without it. If I were beginning again, I would not dwell upon what was not given. I would focus upon what may now be understood. For awareness once gained may be applied immediately. There is also a final understanding. A man's financial condition is not determined solely by how much he has worked, but by how he has thought while working. For thought directs action, and action produces result. If the thought remains limited, the result will reflect it. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, examine what you have believed about money and determine whether it produces what you desire. Let this be fixed firmly within. I seek understanding beyond effort. I direct what I earn. I think beyond what I was taught. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as awakening. For the moment a man begins to question his long-held assumptions, he begins to see new possibility. And when possibility is seen, direction may change. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would begin here, not by working more, but by understanding more. For in that understanding, I would redirect my effort, and in redirecting my effort, I would begin to move not only with consistency, but with purpose, with awareness, and with a direction that leads not merely to stability, but to something greater than I had once believed possible. Having recognized that effort alone did not determine outcome, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to understand where these patterns first began. For a man does not arrive at his financial condition suddenly. He is guided toward it gradually, through repeated instruction received long before he ever earned his first dollar. These instructions are rarely questioned. They are accepted early, repeated often, and reinforced through example. A man is taught to be careful, to be cautious, to preserve what he has. He is told that loss must be avoided, that safety must be maintained, that stability is the highest aim. And because these ideas appear wise, they are followed without examination. If I were beginning again, I would look closely at these early teachings, not to reject them, but to understand what they produce when followed without expansion. For caution, when repeated, becomes hesitation. Preservation, when emphasized alone, becomes limitation. And safety, when pursued above all else, restricts movement. There is also the idea of saving. A man is taught to save his earnings, to protect them, to hold them carefully. This appears responsible, and in many ways it is. Yet what is not taught is what must follow. Saving alone preserves, it does not multiply. And if money is held without direction, it remains as it is. If I were beginning again, I would not stop at preservation. I would ask what must be done after money is saved. For saving is not the conclusion, it is the beginning of direction. There is also the instruction to avoid risk. A man is told that risk leads to loss, that it must be minimized, that it must be approached with caution. Yet he is not taught what risk truly is. He is not shown how it may be understood, measured, or directed. He is simply taught to avoid it. If I were beginning again, I would not avoid risk entirely. I would seek to understand it. For what is understood may be controlled, but what is avoided entirely cannot be used. There is also the formation of habit through repetition. A man follows these instructions year after year. He earns, he saves, he protects, he avoids, he maintains, and in doing so, he builds a pattern. This pattern becomes familiar, it becomes comfortable, and eventually it becomes identity. If I were beginning again, I would recognize that identity is not chosen in a single moment. It is formed through repeated action. And once formed, it directs future decisions without effort. There is also a subtle shift that occurs over time. A man no longer considers alternative approaches. He does not ask whether his method produces the highest result. He continues, because it is what he has always done, and what has always been done is rarely questioned. If I were beginning again, I would question gently but firmly. I would ask whether what I have repeated has produced what I truly desire or merely what I was taught to accept. There is also the example of men who followed these instructions faithfully, yet remained within narrow boundaries. They worked diligently. They avoided error. They preserved what they earned. Yet their condition did not expand significantly. It remained steady, predictable, and limited. If I were beginning again, I would not view this as failure. I would see it as the result of incomplete instruction. For effort was present, but understanding was not expanded. There is also the contrast of men who were exposed to a different perspective. A man such as Andrew Carnegie did not merely learn to earn, he learned to observe how wealth was created beyond effort. He studied systems, structures, and the movement of capital. And in doing so, he developed a different identity, one that directed rather than simply received. If I were beginning again, I would seek this perspective, not to abandon what I have learned, but to expand it. There is also the influence of repetition upon belief. A man who is told repeatedly to be careful begins to see opportunity as danger. A man who is told to avoid loss begins to avoid growth. These beliefs are not formed through logic, they are formed through repetition. If I were beginning again, I would examine these beliefs carefully. I would ask whether they protect me or limit me. There is also the perception of others. A man who follows these early instructions appears responsible. He is steady, he is predictable, he is reliable. Yet over time, he may also appear limited. Not because he lacks ability, but because his actions do not extend beyond what he has been taught. If I were beginning again, I would maintain responsibility, but expand direction. For responsibility alone maintains, while direction advances. There is also the gradual realization that identity may be changed. A man may have followed one pattern for many years, yet it is not fixed. It has been formed, and what has been formed may be reshaped through new repetition. If I were beginning again, I would not see my past as restriction. I would see it as foundation, something upon which a new structure may be built. There is also the importance of awareness in this process. A man must first see the pattern before he can change it. He must recognize the repeated instruction, the repeated behavior, the repeated result. And in this recognition, he gains the ability to act differently. If I were beginning again, I would develop this awareness deliberately. I would observe my own decisions. I would question my own habits, and I would adjust where necessary. There is also a final realization. A man's financial life is not determined by chance, nor by effort alone, but by the ideas he has accepted and repeated over time. These ideas form his identity, and his identity shapes his decisions. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, examine what you were taught and determine whether it leads where you wish to go. Let this be fixed firmly within. I release what limits me. I expand what I have learned. I choose my direction. Repeat this not as rejection of the past, but as expansion beyond it. For the moment a man begins to think beyond his early instruction, he begins to act beyond it. And when he acts beyond it, his results begin to change. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having recognized the misunderstanding of effort, I would do this next. I would examine the teachings that formed me, and I would expand them until what once limited me becomes the very point from which I begin to grow, to direct. and to move toward a result that was never reached not because it was impossible, but because it was never fully understood. Having understood that early instruction formed a man's financial identity, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to recognize the distinction between two conditions that are often mistaken for one another. These conditions are stability and expansion. They appear similar at first, yet they produce entirely different results over time. Stability provides safety. It maintains position. It protects what has been built. It ensures that a man does not fall backward. These are valuable qualities, and they must not be dismissed. Yet stability alone does not create advancement. It preserves, but it does not multiply. If I were beginning again, I would not reject stability, but I would not mistake it for progress. For many men have lived within stability for decades, believing they were moving forward, when in truth they were remaining in place. There is a pattern that becomes visible when this distinction is understood. A man works, earns, saves, and maintains. His condition remains steady. It does not decline, it does not collapse, yet it does not expand significantly either. It remains within a defined range, repeating itself year after year. If I were beginning again, I would recognize this pattern early. I would see that preservation alone creates repetition. And repetition without direction produces no increase beyond what is already established. There is also the quiet assumption that time will transform stability into expansion. A man believes that if he continues long enough, something greater will emerge. Yet time, when applied to the same pattern, produces more of the same pattern. It does not create a different result unless the pattern itself is altered. If I were beginning again, I would not rely upon time alone. I would change the pattern. For time magnifies direction, but it does not create it. There is also the nature of comfort within stability. A man who has achieved a certain level of security becomes accustomed to it. He does not wish to disturb it. He avoids uncertainty. He avoids change. And in doing so, he remains where he is. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. If I were beginning again, I would understand that comfort, when left unexamined, becomes containment. It holds a man within boundaries that he no longer questions. There is also the contrast of expansion. Expansion requires movement beyond what is known. It requires the willingness to direct money, not merely hold it. It requires understanding, not just effort. And because it involves uncertainty, it is often avoided by those who have been taught to preserve above all else. If I were beginning again, I would not avoid expansion because it feels unfamiliar. I would study it. For what is unfamiliar may still be necessary. There are men who reach later years and discover this difference with clarity. They see that their lives have been stable, yet not expansive. They have done what was expected. They have fulfilled their obligations. Yet something remains unfulfilled, not in effort, but in outcome. If I were beginning again, I would not interpret this realization as regret. I would see it as awareness. For awareness does not condemn, it reveals. There is also the example of men who chose expansion earlier. They did not abandon responsibility, but they added direction. They sought to understand how money could grow beyond their immediate effort. They placed their earnings where they could increase. They allowed time to multiply, not merely preserve. A man such as John D. Rockefeller did not rely upon stability alone. He directed capital. He understood movement. And in doing so, he expanded beyond the limits of labor. If I were beginning again, I would study such men not to imitate their position, but to understand their approach. There is also the perception of others. A man who remains within stability is seen as dependable. He is trusted. He is respected. Yet he is not seen as one who advances significantly. His life is predictable. A man who understands expansion appears different. He is still responsible, yet he is also directed. He moves beyond what is expected, and in time, he is seen not only as stable, but as capable of growth. If I were beginning again, I would not choose between these conditions. I would combine them. I would maintain stability while pursuing expansion. There is also the shift that must occur within thought. A man must move from asking, "How do I protect what I have?" to asking, "How do I increase what I have?" This shift appears small, yet it changes everything, for the question determines the direction of thought, and thought determines action. If I were beginning again, I would ask better questions. For better questions produce better direction. There is also the role of decision. Expansion does not occur by accident. It is chosen. It is pursued. It is built through repeated direction. A man must decide that he will no longer remain within the same pattern. He must act upon that decision consistently. If I were beginning again, I would make this decision firmly. Not once, but repeatedly, until it becomes natural. There is also the removal of fear that accompanies this shift. A man who has lived with instability may fear change. He may fear loss. He may fear uncertainty. Yet these fears are often the result of unfamiliarity, not danger. If I were beginning again, I would not allow fear to prevent understanding. I would approach it with awareness. For what is understood loses its power to restrict. There is also the compounding effect of expansion once it begins. A single directed action produces a small result, but repeated directed action produces accumulation. And accumulation produces growth that appears to accelerate over time. If I were beginning again, I would trust this accumulation. For it does not require sudden change, it requires consistent direction. There is also a transformation in identity. A man who once saw himself as one who maintains begins to see himself as one who expands. This identity influences every decision. He no longer accepts limitation as final. He seeks movement. He expects increase. If I were beginning again, I would allow this identity to form fully. There is also a final realization. Stability is necessary, but it is not sufficient. It provides foundation, but not elevation. And a man who remains only within stability will remain within the same condition, no matter how long he continues. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, maintain what you have, but direct it toward increase. Let this be fixed firmly within. I preserve with purpose. I expand with direction. I do not remain where I have been. Repeat this not as rejection of stability, but as advancement beyond it. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having understood the teachings that formed my identity, I would do this next. I would move beyond preservation alone. I would direct what I have toward growth. And in doing so, I would begin to experience not only the safety I was taught to value, but the expansion I was never shown, and the results that follow when stability becomes the foundation, not the limit of a man's financial life. Having understood the difference between stability and expansion, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to recognize what allows expansion to occur beyond the limits of effort. For a man may work diligently, remain consistent, and act with discipline, yet still find that his progress is confined within the boundaries of what he can personally produce. This boundary is not a failure of effort, it is a limitation of method, and that limitation is removed through a principle few men were ever taught to understand. That principle is leverage. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to increase effort endlessly. I would seek to understand how effort may be multiplied. For there is a point beyond which effort alone cannot produce greater result, and at that point something else must be introduced. There is a common belief that income increases in proportion to effort, that if a man works more, he will earn more, and to a degree this is true, yet it is only true within a certain range. Beyond that range, effort reaches its limit, and further increase becomes difficult. If I were beginning again, I would recognize this limit early. I would see that my time is finite, my energy is finite, and therefore my direct output is finite. And once this is understood, the need for leverage becomes clear. Leverage is the use of something beyond oneself to produce result. It is the ability to extend action beyond personal effort. It may take many forms: capital, systems, knowledge, organization, but in all cases, it serves the same purpose. It allows a man to achieve more than he could through effort alone. If I were beginning again, I would not ask only, "How much can I do?" I would ask, "How can what I do produce more than itself?" There is also the misunderstanding that leverage requires great wealth to begin. This is not so. Leverage begins with understanding. A man may have little, yet if he directs it with intention, it may begin to grow. And as it grows, its capacity to produce increases. If I were beginning again, I would not wait until I possess much. I would begin with what I have, for direction matters more than amount. There are many who spend years exchanging time for income, believing that this exchange will eventually produce abundance. Yet the exchange remains constant. Time is given, money is received. And once time is no longer given, the exchange ceases. This is not a flaw, it is a limitation. If I were beginning again, I would not rely solely upon this exchange. I would introduce something that continues beyond my direct involvement. There is also the example of men who understood this principle clearly. John D. Rockefeller did not rely upon his own labor to produce wealth. He organized systems, he directed capital, he created structures that operated continuously. His effort was not removed, but it was multiplied. If I were beginning again, I would study this approach, not to imitate its scale, but to understand its nature. There is also the role of money within leverage. Money is not only to be held,